Hello and welcome back. Thanks for coming back. You didn't have to, but I'm glad you did. And it's another episode of Cook With Me Live where we are making dulse rolls. Sounds kind of funny. I was kind of thinking, should I call them dulse scrolls, something a little different, or just wraps? But the idea here is I'm going to be teaching you two kind of different skills in particular as far as this meal goes, and a whole bunch of other tricks on how to, I guess, make this into something even more. Okay, so lots to unfold, even though it looks like a relatively simple dish. Those of you that are brand new to Cook With Me Live, please give me a little hello. Let me know that this is your first time cooking with me or first time watching this video. That would be lovely. Those of you that are my regulars, you will probably have a better idea of who you might be able to share this video with. So if you love what we're doing and you're getting some benefit out of this, it could possibly be helping someone else you know too. So please share it along. Even just one friend each would be so lovely. Spread the love. I am doing this for free, absolutely, because I really want you guys to be able to get the maximum benefit from it. And yes, I know that it's real time, so it takes longer than your average quick snapshot video that just tells you the steps. And the reason for that is because you're learning all the other skills that go with it at the same time. So I'll continue my dedication to that. All right, let's jump in. I want to first start out by making the dulse dip. Now this dip is, when you think dip, you might think kind of runny, suitable for a cracker or a cookie, or sorry, a chip or a cracker. But I'm talking like this dip is a little bit more thick, kind of like a cold cream cheese texture. And we would kind of use it like we're going to use, like a person would use cream cheese in, for example, a sushi roll. So this dulse dip in this case is really kind of the feature flavor of the roll. It's going to come out similarly to a sushi roll, as you've probably seen in the photo. But then we're going to add a whole bunch of maybe some slightly different vegetables than you're used to using. So I want to kind of bring all that together for you. So we're going to start out with, I'm going to use a blender. You could use a food processor. You will get, though, a thicker result, or maybe one with slightly more texture. I shouldn't say thicker, it's going to have more crunchy texture to it, whereas this is going to get a little bit smoother. So the reason why I can use this blender though is because it's going to have the stick, so I can kind of help it mix at the same time. If yours doesn't have a stick, it might be too thick for a blender, in which case you probably would need to either scrape it down as you go or potentially use a food processor instead to kind of pull it under the blades a little bit better. Okay, so just so you know the differences between the machines. Okay, now this is one instance where you won't be pre-soaking the sunflower seeds, for example, or pre-soaking the macadamias. So we do actually want these to be dry because we want them to absorb a lot of the moisture from the dip and then to hold the thickness. The other thing too is by wrapping it into the nori paper, you'll actually see that it will absorb the moisture, and if it absorbs too much moisture, then the nori paper kind of disintegrates on itself. So this is kind of this little balance we're going to strike. Now, let's work on about a cup of this. So we need to just grab ourselves a little measure here. Okay. So let's just use this guy. It's approximately a cup we'll need. And this is really going to create the bulk. Now there's so much valuable nutrition in these seeds. I could go on about the protein content, about the sunflower seeds. Ooh, that's testing my memory though. Is it the manganese or is it higher? There's going to be there's so many that science hasn't highlighted yet. So yes, it might be particularly high in some of these common ones that we can all sort of remember. But the thing to not forget when it comes to particularly plant-based foods, nuts, seeds, grains, legumes, vegetables, and fruit, is that there's these things called phytonutrients. And phytonutrients, science knows, it's just, I say science, but scientists know that there's over 100,000 different phytonutrients in plant-based foods. Okay, of which we only understand how 4,000 of those 100,000 really work. And they know that they're extremely beneficial. They're the things like the polyphenols you hear about, the antioxidants, the antivirals, a lot of these kind of components that we know work, but we don't fully understand them. So that's why I believe and why I see such good results by having variety in your diet, particularly variety from more of these sort of plant-based sources. Okay, so let's go about a half a cup, a little bit more of macadamias. I love them. I'm using 1/3 of a cup here, by the way, and I'm not exactly sticking to measure because they're really good. You can customize it. What we're after is you can adjust the flavor for your palate, and we're also after the texture or the consistency for the purpose of this dish. But beyond this dish, if you were to use it for other applications, such as a dip at a party or a dip for chips and that kind of thing, you could definitely make it much more creamy or smooth or less thick by adding more of the wet ingredients, such as the beans, the lemon juice, maybe even a little bit of olive oil and that kind of things. Okay. We're going to drain this off. I hesitated there because I'm thinking, do I need to make any mayonnaise in the next little while? If so, I'd be keeping the aquafaba, which is the juice from the cannellini bean, but I'm actually not going to be doing that in the next little while. Unfortunately, the aquafaba doesn't keep very long in the fridge for the purpose of making mayonnaise, okay? So that's why you kind of want to make it the day of when you open up the jar or can. Okay, so we need about a half a tin of these cannellini beans, but any white beans you have will work. I particularly love the butter beans, the real kind of Italian thick, big, fat butter beans. Those are delicious in this one as well. Now, 3 tablespoons approximately of olive oil. We can kind of eyeball that one if you wish. 1, 2, 3 of olive oil. Same with the lemon juice. Maybe we'll have enough here with this one. Otherwise, we might need to bust open another one. Oh, I should have done that one without the seeds. I guess what I want to show you in doing this is to always juice your lemons outside of the blender first. No, what I want to show you in doing this is that I'm not measuring simply because this dip is very flexible, as in most dips are. And the fact that they're not then being cooked means we can go by taste as we go. So you can kind of put what you think is your best guess of measurements in, and then you can always kind of come back and adjust it for flavor after you've had a chance to give it a taste. Okay. So I think this was a juicy enough lemon. That should be our 3 tablespoons. Normally half a lemon, if it's juicy, is about 2.5 if it's really big and juicy. Okay, so we've got some lemon juice. Now, we need some tamari. You could also be using coconut aminos. So the coconut aminos are going to be quite a bit sweeter than the tamari. And in this dip, that's gonna work quite well. This is gonna be slightly stronger in flavor. So up to you how you wanna do that, but about a tablespoon. Again, we can come back and adjust the taste if needed. Okay. Now, here's one of the little secret ingredients of this dish, however, it's also its namesake, is the dulse flakes. Now, dulse flakes, if you're new to them, I would highly recommend getting yourself some, probably quite a bit of them, and incorporating them in as many dishes as you can. So aside from the fact that we are going to be using the nori paper, which is this form of seaweed, dulse is another form of seaweed. Okay, it's a sea vegetable, and it is full of minerals, full of the perfect complement that nature has designed of minerals for our body, and has been shown now to, well, eating different types of seaweeds and sea vegetables has been shown to have a very positive effect on the thyroid system, whether you know, even if you have kind of Hashimoto's or Graves' disease and some of those thyroid-based conditions in the family, really good to get a lot of sea vegetables into your diet in this form, not in extract form like iodine supplements and things. The body seems to be responding to these a lot better, and it's probably because there's a lot of it that we just haven't explained how it all works yet in the science eyes. Okay, a little bit of red onion. Now, I've called for about 2 tablespoons worth of minced red onion, and I had these 2 little bits and bobs left in the fridge, so let's see how much we can get there. We do want it to be fairly minced, although the blender is going to take care of most of that work for us. Okay, so if you are using more of a food processor, you might just want to do a bit of this mincing beforehand. Okay, so this, again, it's not really intended that that the dip tastes very oniony, but this is going to provide that balance of flavor. So you can kind of eyeball sort of 2 tablespoons. This is going to be over a little bit, actually a lot. I won't put all of that in. Could get a bit nuts. We'll save that for a dish tomorrow night. Okay. And And then last but not least, we need some onion powder and some salt. So yes, I know we've put onion in. The onion powder, it does have a different enough profile and different enough taste to warrant the two of them in there. So this is a nice powdered form of onion powder, okay? You can get onion granules and you can get the onion kind of dehydrated pieces, but I prefer the powdered form. So about 3/4 teaspoon of that, and then some salt. Do we have the other big salt one? Okay, so fair bit of salt. It's gonna look like a lot here, but not a lot's coming out at once. So we need about a teaspoon. And again, we're gonna go by taste. Keep in mind, once we put this into the nori roll, that the vegetables that are gonna go in beside it are not otherwise coming with a salty flavor as it is. So we're gonna rely on kind of the major flavor component of this roll, especially if it's going to be eaten on its own, to carry the flavor in the dulse dip. Okay, now you might need a little bit of water, just a touch, to get this to blend up. But let's see if we can do that just with the lemon juice and the tamari, and try to keep it as thick as we can for the sake of our rolls. Okay, now this probably needs maybe one more little press down with the spatula and one more round, because you can see how we've got kind of a nice smooth dip, but it's still a little bit chunky. So you could stop here. This is probably just fine. I just want to make sure we don't get any kind of huge chunks of macadamia in this as well. So I'm going to just kind of press it down, give it a little manual stir, and then go one more time. So you can see how thick it is. And yes, it might be a little bit hard on your machine, but this is exactly the texture we're after. If we go too much more liquidy than that, it's not going to go well in a sushi roll. So as I mentioned before, it's kind of like we're after cold cream cheese texture. Okay. Okay, so give that a little taste, have a little try, and see if it needs anything. So we kind of want a salty, a little bit lemony. The dulse is subtle. Some of you may smell the dulse and just smell the sea, and it might put some of you off, but please try to adapt your taste buds to it for the sake of your health. You don't need a ton of it in your diet, right? It's very potent, awesome stuff. But regularly is better than having a big hit every now and then. So these little rolls, you can even get as fancy. Those of you that are doing more of the raw diet, or particularly the raw 80-20 cleanse that my chefs are doing this month. Who are my chefs? Give me a little hurrah and hello. Let me know if you're into this. You should be well and truly into this cleanse, or it's not really a cleanse, it's more of a reset, the raw reset by now. But let me know if you're onto this, because there is a way to actually take this. If you have a dehydrator, you roll it up into the nori paper without the vegetables. And if you roll it really skinny, like little kind of pipes, and then you dehydrate it, it kind of tastes and feels like pepperoni. Whether you want that or not is up to you, but that kind of chewy texture of pepperoni with a lot of the flavor in there as well, it's kind of indicative of that. So just a little idea for something a little different, if you wish. So just to kind of show you really how we're working here, it is a very thick dip. So again, cold cream cheese. And if you ever have made sushi and put cream cheese in it before, then you'll know that it's nice to work with when it's this texture. If it's any wetter than that, it's going to create a mess. Okay, so that's exactly what we're after. Okay, I'll clean that up better later. Now, one of the kind of fun ingredients This is not your traditional sushi roll. It was never intended like that. It just happens to be wrapped in nori paper and taste a little bit like the sea. I want to use asparagus and green beans. And the reason why I want to choose these is A, because they're long and skinny. They fit nicely in a roll. B, because they're green and green's good for you. And C, because I think they're a little bit special and underrated. So I'm going to use both of them. You can use one or the other. They might not always be in season too. Okay, and what we're going to do is just very, very lightly, we're going to blanch them. So I've given these a wash already. I'm just taking the really hard knobby end off. And maybe while I do that, I probably should get the hot water kind of up to a boil in the saucepan first. So if you haven't already got kind of a small or medium saucepan out, we only need like half a cup of water in the bottom of the saucepan, depending on how wide it is. Okay, we just need enough to generate enough steam to just quickly cook these. So I'm gonna put, let's do 1/3 of a cup, maybe a little bit more. Probably need 2/3 of a cup in this size of a pot, just because we don't want it to boil dry. But that's gonna be plenty. I could have definitely done a half a cup in this size of a pot. Okay, so I'm gonna put that on the boil, really simple, lid on, high heat. Okay. And then here's the trick. So the beans are pretty much prepared as is. We just needed to take those hard little knobby ends off. So they're gonna go in whole. And then with the asparagus, there's usually a tough bit at the end. So the trick to know how little you can take off without wasting too much is to start cutting through it and pay attention to how hard it is to cut. Okay? It's regardless of how sharp your knife is, you just want to get a relative feel for how hard it is to cut through at the base. And that's going to tell you when you can stop, basically. So as soon as it becomes noticeably easier to cut, then you know that you've trimmed off enough of the asparagus ends, and now you're not going to get that stringy, inedible kind of piece at the bottom. Okay, so I was pretty close on that last one. If I wanted to confirm, I could just take one more slice off, and that felt pretty smooth compared to the first cut. So like I said, it's not about how sharp your knife is, it's about the difference between that first definitely knobby fibrous end to when you get in a little bit further. It's usually it's noticeably different the way you cut it. Okay, so these bits are going to go to the compost. They probably could also go in your broth, actually. Yes, I don't think those would go bitter in the broth. That's one thing I've never actually specifically tested, is the asparagus in broth, whether it goes bitter. Okay, so the next step with the asparagus, just simply for the sake of these rolls and the even cooking of them, is we want to cut them lengthwise. Okay, so it's a little bit of concentration, especially for the skinny ones. But we just want to open them up. It's going to help them cook down a little bit faster while still kind of preserving the crispy, nice, fresh lightness that we want in the asparagus. And at the same time, it's actually going to make it nicer to roll up. And I'll show you what I mean by that as well. So be very careful while you hold the edge of the knife there. And we just want to go through the middle lengthways. Okay. These are quite nice skinny pieces. Sometimes you can get the big fat asparagus, but I find they tend to be a little bit tougher. Okay, so we've got our half asparagus, we've got our full green beans. We're gonna call them good at the same amount of cooking time. They only are gonna need maybe 2 or 3 minutes in the boiling water, especially if there's little water and mostly steam with a lid on, they're gonna cook even faster. Steam is hotter than boiling water, FYI. Some people really look at me and go, hang on, what'd she just say? Steam is hotter than boiling water, so it cooks faster. Okay, let's see where we're at. Come on back. Like I said, we only need a couple of minutes with these guys, and we do have the boiling water. Okay, so very shallow boiling water, basically straight in, and these, try to keep the tops of the asparagus up out of the water if you can, if your pot's too shallow for them to lay flat. Okay, and we'll put the beans down the bottom. Lid on. And you probably don't want to walk away. Maybe you do 2 or 3 minutes later, but we don't want to overdo it. We still want that nice little bit of crunch, okay? So they've been softened, they've been blanched, but lightly blanched. So I'm talking maybe 2 minutes, maybe 3 at this temperature. I haven't turned the temperature down, by the way. It's still on kind of that rumbling boil to keep the heat. but we don't really want to do any longer than that, and especially don't want to go to the point where that bright green starts to become dull. Okay, so just as a bit of an FYI, whenever you're steaming vegetables, whenever you're boiling anything, ideally you're steam cooking as opposed to boiling vegetables, unless you're going to be drinking the water that it's boiling in like a soup. Okay, because you lose a lot of the ingredients, the vitamins and the minerals into the water. So at least if you drink that as a broth or include that in broth, then you're not fully losing them. But ideally you're cooking by steam, and you're only just cooking until they become bright green and then stopping the cooking straight away. Otherwise it's very easy for them to overcook, even as they just sit in the steamer. So you might have turned them off, taken them off the heat and think that they're done, but if they're still in the hot pot or there's still water underneath them and creating that steam, they're going to overcook. So it's one thing you really want to just do right before you're ready to serve the meal, and most people really appreciate their vegetables still hot if they're intended to be. In this case, we do want them to have a chance to chill out. Okay, so we're probably pretty close, especially because I like it fairly crisp and crunchy. That's been what, about 2 minutes? Have I gabbed long enough? Should I gab longer? Let's call that good. Okay, and now the trick is that we want to drain this, and we want to run some cold water over it fairly soon, because we want to stop the cooking. It's also called arresting the cooking, okay? Because we do not want to overdo these. Okay, so I'm just going to put them in a sieve, through a sieve, and I'm going to run a little bit of cold water over that. And then I'm going to let that sit to air dry. Okay, that's pretty much the hardest part. Now the rest is easy. So now we just get to do strips of vegetables. When I say easy though, if it's new to you, do pay attention to the little things, because it's amazing how many times I get feedback saying, wow, I've never seen a capsicum cut that way, and you make it look so easy. So thank you for that feedback, because it also helps me know what you're getting out of this in terms of specific teaching or skills or knowledge tips, and what you maybe want to hear more of as well. So I do love getting that feedback. Please feel free to keep sending that on in, or even just typing it in the comments, so that I can have that knowledge and continue to provide you more of that. I'm also happy to take your ideas for future recipes that you'd like to see done in the Ashley-fied way. That wasn't a term I came up with, but it's been used many times now through a lot of my wonderful kitchen crew, and my kitchen crew doing the my 12-week kitchen reset program. That they're saying, hey, look, Ashley, can you Ashley-fy this dish so it's healthier or gluten-free or something like that? Okay, now we want long strips of this. That's actually probably the perfect length for this. So I'm not going to cut that in half. Okay, I'm going to keep these the full length, and I think we want nice skinny strips, kind of like we're doing sushi. But usually in sushi they would do fairly chunky cucumber pieces, but I like to have multiple pieces rather than a big chunky one in the middle. Okay, so I'm going to do sort of thinner strips here. There we go. One cucumber should be enough there. Now, if you can't get a hold of kohlrabi or find any baby corn, absolutely okay. I was just trying to get a little bit more variety in the diet here. And for those of you that have never experienced kohlrabi, I would recommend you do keep your eye out for it, because it is delicious. It's one of my absolute favorite vegetables, raw or cooked. Usually raw, I have it. Sometimes, well, I grew up with Dad growing it in the garden and bringing us kids out to the garden and just grabbing a kohlrabi out of the garden, literally, giving it maybe a rinse under the hose, taking off the leaves, peeling it with his garden knife. And he had a little garden salt shaker hidden in the side of the garden corner, literally like near the dirt, with the knife. And he just opened that, give us a little salt on top of the slice of kohlrabi. And I remember eating that as a kid. It was a very fond memory. And it is a very delicious vegetable that's finally now come back into fashion come into fashion in Australia. And you should see the look on the farmer's face. If you go to a real farmer at a farmer's market and you see kohlrabi and you go, oh, kohlrabi, they normally look at you and go, wow, you know what that is? And then they're so grateful that they grew it, and then you're grateful that they grew it, and then it's just this wonderful, beautiful thing. So I would recommend that you get to go and seek out the kohlrabi and make that Farmer's Day. Any vegetable that's not common, that you can appreciate that they grow, please do that, because we are losing so many vegetable species and fruit species and plant species, and so many are going extinct simply because they're not being continued, like the people are not continuing to grow them. So we're losing the seeds, we're losing the viability of the seeds, or the seeds are getting kind of changed by hybridization, by mixing of the different species side by side when they get grown, and then it changes the seeds over time. So it is very important I think, to support the farmers that are still growing some of these heirloom varieties that you cannot get in supermarkets. And I feel for them, because if people don't recognize what they are and know how to use them, people are scared of them and they're scared to try it. And you're not going to be those people, right? You're going to be the ones that go, ooh, I have no idea what that is. Let's make that my new vegetable for the week and just figure out what it is when I get home. Thankfully for Google, you can even practically search by image now. But honestly, please do that, because it's what we need if we want to still have a food diversity around for our kids. I say our kids, it's not even probably grandkids we're worried about, it's even the next generation at the rate we're going in some cases and some veggies. So the moral of that story was, I couldn't get kohlrabi this time of year, and nor could I get baby corn, so we're going to use carrot. And that's okay too. It's going to add a little bit of orange color to our dish. Okay, a little bit of avocado, and then I think we're ready. I've got my sun-dried tomatoes here already, so let's chop into this guy. Hopefully we get lucky. It's always a bit like the lottery, isn't it? When you cut open an avocado. Yes, we did get lucky. All right, now let's go lengthways with this one. So strips this way, and then we are going to need a spoon to help us take that out. Notice I'm using the dull edge of the knife so I don't cut through and into my hand. Okay, now the fun bit, the rolling. Let's make yourself some space. And here is how we make Dulse rolls. Okay, so you've got your nori paper. Probably it's best if you take out a couple at a time so you don't keep going in with potentially wet fingers. Okay, now if you can see on the paper, there are lines that have been scored in it. Now, not a huge big deal, because you probably won't end up cutting directly on the line anyways, but the idea of the lines is that that's your cut marks. So if you put the lines perpendicular to your body, then when you roll it up, you'll have kind of those cut marks in place. You won't be working against the grain, and it will actually usually hold better because of the way that they shape the sheets as well. Just a little technical detail. Okay, now you can get really particular, but really this is just, it's kind of like a regular sushi roll in the sense of we don't need to do anything too out of the norm to make it all that different. But usually people's tendency is to overfill. Okay, now the difference here is we're not using rice to begin with, so you can use maybe a little bit more ingredients overall. Okay, but what I like to do is to kind of create a little bit of I guess a flat pattern rather than a sushi pile like we would maybe normally do with sushi. Is I want to create a little bit of a pattern here, and I'll show you why. So I'm just going to lay these kind of flat, and then let's do maybe a green, maybe another green. You do not have to get this fancy with it. This is me now having fun with my food, and if you don't really like having fun with your food and it's just purposely there to eat, that's okay. Your body might love you more if you love your food more and have more fun with it, but that's maybe for another day. Okay, don't want to forget any of these goodies. Let's get some avocado in there. Is this anyone's first time rolling sushi? Is this your first time using nori paper? I'd love to hear that. And it's great if you can let us know, because hopefully you'll see how easy it is, and this can open up a whole bunch of other meal ideas for you, I hope. Okay, so let's put our couple little strips of anchovy-looking sun-dried tomatoes. And then here's the slightly messy but fun part. So kind of like you would do with again, if you were using, like, for example, all I can liken this texture to is cream cheese. If you're doing sushi rolls, is you can shape it with your hands like this, right? So we want kind of a roll that is about the same length as your wrapper, your nori paper. Don't know if you can see that on a good angle there. Okay, so I'm going to put that somewhere towards the edge closest to me, and I'm going to make sure it's the full length of the nori paper. It can squish out a little bit, so that's okay. Now, ideally when we roll this, we will have just enough vegetables to go all the way around this roll of Dulse dip, and it'll look really pretty when we cut it. Let's hope. Here we go. Cross your fingers and your toes. Let's see how we go. It's a little bit easier, like I said, because we don't have rice in there. So you want to put a bit of pressure on it, okay? So you want to squeeze a little bit as you roll and keep it, you're kind of pulling back on it to keep it nice and tight as you roll it in. And then tuck with your fingers, tuck those last little ingredients under as you squeeze a little bit and you finish the roll. So now this edge, we need to finish with some water. So get yourself a little finger bowl, probably close to there. Give it one little wet on this edge with your fingers, and we finish the roll. And as you finish it around, then we're gonna maybe just touch a little bit more water on that seal surface. So right on that seam, it's actually good that you can't see where that seam is because we want it to stick straight away. And if you let that sit for even maybe 3 or 4 minutes, it should then hold and follow the stick. So I'm gonna let that sit for 1 second while I show you one more, and then I'm gonna cut into it and show you how pretty they look once we get to the end. This is such a good snack. It's a good meal on the run. It's also extremely nice as a party food to bring to a party on a platter because the amount of color, the fact that it's so different to what most people are used to when they see a sushi roll too is quite refreshing. Okay, so let's do one more strip. Let's see if we can get that lined up. Maybe a bit of difference in color, different pattern. No one's really gonna notice. You also don't have to put each of these ingredients in every single roll. So if you wanted to keep some with sun-dried tomatoes, some without cucumber, some without capsicum, you can completely customize that as well. I tend to just like everything loaded. So everyone ends up the same with all of the ingredients in it. I guess there's no fights that way then. Okay, gotta get the green beans, can't forget the special asparagus, especially if it happens to not quite be in season and you paid a little bit of a special premium for it. And it's nice too with the fancy asparagus if you stick them out the ends slightly. Notice how I've stuck the cucumber? You can even put a couple of bits of carrot out the end so that when you end up cutting this into the roll shape, you'll actually have that sort of decorative look out the end, which is very nice. Okay, am I forgetting anything? Got that? Okay, our Dulse dip. So you can see that this Dulse dip is probably gonna stretch over probably only about 6 rolls. So instead of doubling the Dulse dip recipe in the blender, you saw how hard the blender was working for that amount. I'd probably recommend you double the ingredients in a bowl and then put half at a time to blend half at a time in the blender so that you don't burn out the motor. Okay, so we'll put that little bit in there, cross it again, cross fingers, here we go. Tuck it in nice and tight, squish evenly. Oh, getting a bit loose. And keep tucking. Notice I'm really pulling back on it as I'm pushing down on the board to get that nice tight wrap. There we go. Seal off the edge, roll it up, finish the edge, and done. There you go, eat it like that. Not quite. You could even just cut them in half. But like I said, as I promised, that's had a chance to sit and seal. So now we can't even tell where that seal is, which is quite nice. The one little caution is that the amount of moisture that's going to be touching the edges, touching the inside of this nori paper, will mean that these will be fairly soft by tomorrow. So still very doable, but I'd recommend you do your cutting of them now before you refrigerate and have tomorrow, just because it'll tear a little bit more easily tomorrow. Okay, so sometimes if you're serving it as a lunch, you could cut on the diagonal. I'll do this one here on the diagonal, okay? And then you get these beautiful, full of color wraps all in one. Okay, so you could serve that as a nice little dish for lunch. On a plate, maybe you'd put a little bit of sauerkraut, a little nice little noodle salad, like a little vermicelli noodle salad. You could have that with even, I don't know, some crackers. Sky's the limit. Or we can cut it more like a sushi. So I shouldn't even say sushi. It's technically not meant to be a sushi roll. I think that's technically blasphemy in the Japanese language. Okay, so we get the nice little end bits by cutting it like that. I'm going to do a better display here for you, so if you can't quite see that, bear with me. Let's just put that on a plate straight away. Should have got my fancy other plates out. Okay, so we can put these guys on the plate, and I like to cut them fairly skinny and fairly delicate because it just makes it a little bit nicer to be able to pop the entire one in your mouth at once. Okay, so see how we get that nice sort of effect around the edges. You can see how it would have been nicer with maybe more carrot, a little bit more orange color in there too, but we've got these nice little rolls. And especially if you get the kids involved with this, then they're more likely to try it. They just want to be included. They want to feel like their voice can be heard too, and that they get some level of choice. And maybe you're only giving them 2 options, but they felt like they had power to choose. Both options you gave them were the right answer, according to you. But there we have it. So something a little different, but like a nice little snack. It can be an appetizer or it can be a meal. Ideally, if this is a dinner, that's great because it is a little bit on the lighter side. And ideally, the dinner meal should be a little bit lighter for the sake of our digestion when we go to bed. Hopefully it's done digesting by the time you go to bed. Another story for another day. Feel free to dip these in tamari or have it with the sushi ginger, even some wasabi instead, or in addition to that. And serve it with whatever tickles your fancy, maybe even a little bit of miso soup. But there we have it, nice and simple, Dulse rolls. I hope you enjoy. We'll see you on the next Cook With Me Live.